And I've got a relatively short talk, but I really want to talk a bit about some of the advances. I want to talk about the advances, and in some ways, things which we can actually do to help you all in the clinic now. But also there's been a lot of talk about research which involves you as people. Some of the work that I'm going to talk about is the sort of research that's done specifically in laboratories. And that sort of research, and you have to realise that behind the scenes, a lot of research is being done to try and fundamentally change the course of these diseases. What we want to do is try and stop these diseases ever happening, or to cure these diseases. And that's why some of the research that we do is very much based around a test tube rather than involving people. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of that research. We've heard already, and this slide's been up on numerous occasions, that mitochondrial disease can affect several different tissues. And it is a problem in the mitochondria. And we've got to ask ourselves, why do mitochondria go wrong? Why do the batteries go wrong? The batteries go wrong, so everybody with mitochondrial disease has got a problem in their genes. And genes are the things which make mitochondria. Very important. So the genes are so important in all aspects of our lives that people have mitochondrial disease because there is an abnormality in the gene. So what are genes? Well, genes are just simply bits of DNA, and basically what happens is you get an error. And that error can be as simple as one base change out of hundreds of thousands. One bit of spelling mistake can put a whole gene out. And what that means is if the gene is affected, you don't make normal mitochondria. And if you don't make normal mitochondria, you get mitochondrial disease. So just so you're absolutely aware that it's genetic defects, it's abnormality of the genes which causes mitochondrial disease. Now, we all know that we inherit genes. And actually, those of you that are helpers or myself or whatever, you can see a bit of my mum and my dad in me. My daughters can see a bit of me, and all the good things come from my mum, as they keep saying, right? But you can see things like that. So we all get genes from our mum and our dad. And most mitochondrial genes come from your mother and your father, a mixture. So most of them. So when we make up mitochondria, there's about 1,000 bits of information, at least 1,000 bits. And over 980 genes that make up the mitochondria actually come from your mum and your dad. But there are some very, very important genes which are just passed down through the mother. Okay? And these are genes which are present in the mitochondria, and these are the genes that are abnormal in a significant portion of patients with mitochondrial disease. Now, one of the things, and anybody who's been listening to the news today will know this, that many people or many families that are here actually know where their genetic defect is. We've no idea that in our lifetime how much things have changed. Even in the time that I've been looking after patients with mitochondrial diseases, we've gone from nobody actually having a genetic defect now to about 50%. Half of our patients we've identified a genetic defect. And that's been in about 25 years. In the next 5 years, I can pretty well guarantee we'll know everybody's genetic defect, because of the new advances that are coming along where we're able to look much better at these genetic defects. The technology is unbelievable, and it will mean that we will know a lot more about mitochondrial diseases. And that's crucial, Because if we don't know the cause, how are we ever going to know the treatment? So finding those genetic defects for those people who don't have a genetic defect is an utmost priority for us, and something that we're working very closely with several groups around the country and several groups around the world. And many of you will hear that the Wellcome Trust, who actually supports some of our research, has just announced that the place which sequenced the human genome, which is a place called the Sanger Centre just outside of Cambridge, is going to sequence the entire genome of 10,000 people in the next couple of years. We're linked into that Sanger Centre. We're going to be looking at patients with mitochondrial disease. So identifying a genetic defect is absolutely crucial. Why? Well, because if we know what's wrong, we will be able to give you advice about the risks of passing that on to your children. And one of the things that's very, very important to us is to try and prevent these diseases occurring. And if we know where the defect is, we might be able to help with that. And that's certainly one of our key aims, and that's one of the reasons why people who come to our clinic speak to myself, Dr. McFarlane, Dr. Schaefer, Dr. Gorman. We try and give as much advice as possible about the genetics of this condition. What we talk about are the risks of transmitting this, and it's different for everybody. And I can't stress this enough, that for every individual person or every individual couple, the advice we give is individual. So there might be several people in this room that's apparently got the same genetic defect. The advice that we would give for each person would be different, even if you have the same defect. So it's crucial that that's independent. So having given that advice, I'll just go back. We've given that advice, and we give the advice to the best of our ability. We will be able to discuss the things like risks. We don't know, sometimes we don't know the answers, but at least we'll be able to give you the best possible information. But then, what can we do? So if we've identified a genetic defect, for example, in either one of the parents, then what can we do? Well, there's a variety of things that we can advise. And people, again, Dr. McFarland and I and the others in the team, we don't really advise, we give choices. It's not about what we would do, it's about what you do. And we all make choices in our lives. We all accept risk in our lives. Many of you will be going home by car. There's a risk in driving home. There's a risk in everything we do. And what we do is we tend to talk about things in terms of risk. So one of the things that we can do is, if we know where the genetic defect is, people can have either egg or occasionally sperm donation. So this is a process where there is a bank of people who've donated eggs or sperm specifically to allow people to have healthy children. Now that may or may not be appropriate for you, or it may or may not be something that you'd want to consider, but it's something that's available.